And the New York Jets continue to win the 2022 NFL Draft in more ways than one. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Rich Sports Talk. Thank you so much for being here today. If you're new to the channel, make sure you bash that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our latest content, especially content on the New York Jets. And there's been so much to talk about. We've done so much draft recap, but I think it was interesting too to break down one of the interesting aspects really that I took out of the draft. And I want to see if you agree or disagree with me. We can talk about undrafted free agents as well. I'll probably do a little bit more of a focus on that later this week. But for now, let's look at why the Jets are winning the draft. And the first thing is, look, I think the Jets absolutely crushed the draft. I think they got great players. I think that when you see people in the media, people that cover this event, experts almost unanimously giving the Jets an A plus grade. And I understand that the draft, like you can't judge a draft until 2 or 3 years down the road. But you look at what the Jets drafted, where they were drafting, and the players that were available and the players that they took. It was unanimous that the Jets were aggressive. The Jets got great players. The Jets improved this roster, and that this Jet team was really focusing and had a plan, which all goes back to Joe Douglas. And for me, this wasn't a telling draft about Joe Douglas and why I've had confidence in Joe Douglas. And I know a lot of people will point to the fact that, yes, his 2020 draft was not great. But I also will defend him in the regards that for his first draft, for a vastly different coach, and oh, by the way, just during COVID, I do think greatly impacted him. But you've looked at the last two drafts, and I can honestly say, I don't think the Jets have had this type of guy in charge of player personnel in a long time, and someone that I feel confident in assembling this roster. The best organizations in football, you have to have a mix of three or four things. You have to have either a great head coach, a great owner, a great GM, and a great quarterback. Now, the jury's out on three of those for the Jets, but I do think that they have that great general manager. And you look really like the best organizations, like the best teams, the perennial great teams in this league have that in common. I mean, during the Patriot dynasty, you can make the case that Robert Kraft was one of the best owners. You can make the case that Bill Belichick was one of the best coaches. Tom Brady was the best quarterback. And at the time, their front office was really well run. Now I'm not so sure about the front office. They don't have the quarterback anymore. They have two of the four things. But Joe Douglas, for me, has done an unbelievable job of turning this roster around and really starting with nothing and also making impactful trades, which weren't popular at the time and brought a lot of questions. But now that we look back and have the chance to look back, they seem like the right call. And I would even go as far to say if Zach Wilson doesn't work this year, I would still feel confident in letting Joe Douglas decide what to do with the quarterback situation. Because could you say that, yes, he didn't judge Zach Wilson the best? Maybe that's the case at the end of this year. But you also can say he's put his young quarterback in the best position of any team with the second year quarterback coming into this season. He's done an unbelievable job building up this roster, building up and turning it around. I mean, we forget just how bad this Jet roster was. We just forget how bad it was. Like, just a great example of the roster that he inherited. Like, you look at the turnover now compared to what it was then. Like, this is the roster he inherited a couple of years ago. Let's look at the offense from a couple of years ago. And of course, it doesn't want to pull up the roster that I just had. Hold on one second, guys. Here we go. Quarterback Sam Darnold, running back Le'Veon Bell, running back Bilal Powell, wide receiver Robbie Anderson, wide receiver Quincy Nunlin, wide receiver Jamison Crowder, tight end Chris Herndon, tight end Ryan Griffin, offensive line from left to right, Kelvin Beachum, Kelechi Osemele, who never freaking played a game for the Jets, of course, Ryan Khalil, Brian Winters, and Brandon Shell. This is what the Jets offense could look like this year. Zach Wilson, Breece Hall, Michael Carter, Corey Davis, Garrett Wilson, Elijah Moore, CJ Uzama, Tyler Conklin. We're not even throwing Jeremy Ruckert in there. George Fant, Laken Tomlinson, Connor McGovern, Elijah Vera Tucker, and Mekhi Becton. And it's not just that side of the ball. I mean, he's basically had to rebuild the entire defense. This was the Jets' 3-4 defense in conversion to a 4-3 defense of the roster that they put together. This was the old one when Douglas first took over. The only mainstay from this roster is CJ Mosley. And CJ Mosley also didn't play for him for a year. But Brandon Copeland, Leonard Williams, Steve McClendon, Henry Anderson, Jordan Jenkins, CJ Mosley, Avery Williamson, Tremaine Johnson, Brian Poole, Jamal Adams, Marcus May, Darrell Roberts, to now Carl Lawson, Quinton Williams, Sheldon Rankings, John Franklin Myers, and this isn't including their first round pick this year, Jermaine Johnson, Hamza Nasruddin, CJ Mosley, Quincy Williams, DJ Reed, Michael Carter II, the cornerback, Jordan Whitehead, Lamarcus Joyner, and Sauce Gardner. The Jets have done an unbelievable job of turning over this roster. And again, guys, chat's open if you have any questions, comments, would like to get your opinions out today. Would love to hear what you guys have to say. But I just look at what Joe Douglas has done for this team, and really for the first time in a long time. My biggest problem for the Jets for the longest period of time was all these general managers never seemed to have a plan. Mike Maccagnan's plan was, I'm going to take the best player on the board regardless of position, even if that position was of strength. You look at for 20 years until this year, the Jets hadn't drafted a first-round wide receiver. You look at what the Jets front office did for years. How many drafts in the 10s, in the 2010s to the 2020? How many drafts did we as Jet fans go through where their first-round pick was a 3-4 defensive end? And really, the only great 3-4 defensive ends that have come out in the last decade aren't on the Jets. They're Aaron Donald and J.J. Watt. But it was Muhammad Wilkerson. Okay, late first-round pick. He was better than expected. Okay, well, then we're going to get Sheldon Richardson. Okay, we got good defensive line, and, it's kind of limited where we can play them. Okay, now we're going to get Leonard Williams. Didn't we get that the last couple of drafts? Like, it was every year. And then my personal favorite for Mike Maccagnan was the Jamal Adams draft. And Jamal Adams, my favorite thing was he was saying he should have been the first pick in that draft. He should have been all this and that. And if the Jets had to redo it again, Jamal Adams would nowhere be the number one pick. I mean, let's be honest. If the Jets could have gotten Patrick Mahomes with Deshaun Watson in that draft, they certainly would have. But let's just say, for the sake of arguing, that they weren't available on the board. This is some of the other players the Jets could have potentially had in the first round. Michael Williams, Christian McCaffrey, Marshawn Lattimore, Marlon Humphrey, Jonathan Allen, Evan Ingram, not him, actually. I'm just going through this. Tre'Davious White. Oh, yeah, and TJ Watt. Pretty sure all those players would have had a bigger impact. And the Jets in that draft, in a position where a safety isn't the most important position on a team, drafted 2 safeties. And I also will give Joe Douglas credit because he had a lot of work to do. He addressed the offensive line. He's looked to improve it, and he's gotten to a point where it is above average, and I would say more than serviceable. I worry about the depth of Mekhi Becton, but we will see. But the last 2 drafts were very telling because the NFL has changed. You need impact players and playmakers, and these are what I would say are the 5 premium positions now in the NFL. The ones that if you can get great players, you get them. And these are also the players I would pay if they become great players. Now, it used to be I wouldn't include receiver, but the way the rules have changed and how impactful receivers are, I put them on this list. And I almost put it on this list too because you have to draft receivers or pay them. But these are the most impactful positions in the NFL today. Quarterback, wide receiver, offensive line. I don't think it really matters. You just need great offensive linemen. Pass rush and corner. The last 2 drafts by Joe Douglas, in the first 2 rounds, 2 receivers, 1 offensive lineman, 1 edge, 1 corner, 1 quarterback, and that doesn't include offensive weapons of running back and tight end. That doesn't include that. So I just have a feeling that those are really impactful positions, and he's targeted them, and he's been aggressive in acquiring those pieces. And people have given him a lot of flack too, where he made that comment about to Sam Darnold's parents, "Look, I'm going to do everything I can to protect your son." And unfortunately, he didn't get the opportunity to do that, but he's doing that with Zach Wilson. And this is the thing, like this lazy narrative around the Jets that has to go away is the Jets aren't trying to build around a young quarterback. Nothing drove me more batty over last year's draft than for months hearing every national radio head or pundit saying, "Oh, Trevor Lawrence, if the Jets have the number one pick, shouldn't go to the Jets. The Jets won't put pieces around him. The Jets won't help him." If you had to pull these young quarterbacks today in their landing spots, outside of probably Mac Jones and maybe Trey Lance, but if you were to ask Justin Fields or especially Trevor Lawrence today, well, who would you rather be the quarterback of? I'm pretty sure Trevor Lawrence would choose the Jets because unlike the Jets, his team this offseason overspent on a wide receiver, drafted an injury prone guard, paid a boatload of money for an okay tackle, but didn't get tackle number one, and drafted basically all defense for an offensive coach. Yeah, I don't really think that's going to work too well. So I'm just glad that this narrative can't be out there because you look at what Joe Douglas has put around Zach Wilson in a short amount of time, a better offensive line, weapons, and not just weapons, a gluttony of weapons. The Jets now have three or four deep at tight end, and that the Jets now have multiple receivers. We're coming into this year. Braxton Berrios is likely your fourth receiver, and Mims, if he somehow can find it, is your fifth receiver. You all of a sudden come into the season where you have arguably the best running back in the draft coming out with Michael Carter, and Tevin Coleman is your third running back. And Tevin Coleman is a serviceable running back. I guarantee you, like on half the teams right now, he would be a good number two for teams, and he's the Jets' number three option. Some questions in the chat. What do you think is the biggest need on the roster right now? It's kind of a funny one that you say this. To me, it's more the depth right now. I would say for me, probably interior defensive line trying to get a good run stuffer. Now, a lot of this depends on Marshall because don't forget the Jets lost Fatu Kasi. And while they have an incredible pass rush and defensive line depth now, I don't think they have a true good run stopping defensive tackle. I know they brought in Thomas. I know they brought in Curry. I don't really see them as great run defenders. So, but Joe Douglas mentioned this, and this kind of goes to my point too, where he also mentioned the offensive line. But don't forget too, last year the Jets signed Morgan Moses at the end of June. And one thing that the draft does, and Joe pointed this out, and he's absolutely right, is once the draft is over and teams get to reset their roster and see where they're at, they're going to make some moves. And that's usually getting rid of some veteran players that have a higher salary and they want to get some of these young kids in. So, what I believe Joe is going to look for two positions are a swing tackle and a good run stopping defensive tackle. One name that keeps popping up is Fletcher Cox because the Jets were kind of tied to Fletcher Cox a little bit. He has a huge cap number. I mean, the Eagles just traded up to get his replacement. Now, I'm not sure if the Eagles would directly cut him, but could the Jets maybe bring him in for a later round pick? That could be something to keep an eye on. And I also think they're going to look for a good swing tackle. There's a couple of tackles out there now. They're a lot older. They don't really fit the scheme. But a lot of it's also going to come down to of how much that they see from Mekhi Becton if he's in training camp. Yep, Snoopy. I just was going on that Trevor should avoid the Jets. Like, just let's be honest. If I feel horrible for Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields, at least with Trevor Lawrence, okay, the Jaguars have a decent running game. They at least now have an offensive head coach, and they made some moves offensively. Justin Fields, like, man, I feel horrible for that kid because I just have a feeling that this is going to be a rough year for him. The Bears did nothing to help, and then of course you had the comments that they were making about Brisker, which just I can't believe that they would do that. And I just look at the Bears like he's going to fail, and the Bears are going to fail arguably the most talented quarterback that they've had. You can make the case, and this is how bad we talk about the Jets quarterbacks, but I mean Justin Fields arguably is the most talented quarterback that the Bears have had in their franchise history. They've been begging for a quarterback, and they're going to screw this up. Because I also have a feeling too that Trubisky I believe Trubisky's going to win the starting job in Pittsburgh and look good. And I imagine if Trubisky gets to the playoffs, where could you imagine what's going to be like on Chicago Sports Talk Radio, where the Bears are going to be in the top 3 or 4? They're terrible. They're getting the snot being out of them. And they have to watch Mitch Trubisky lead the Steelers. And all of a sudden, that's going to be a hot topic. Like, well, would the Bears have been better off with Mitch in the long term? I mean, that's just, I feel, is going to happen. Everything goes our way. 7 isn't crazy, but I'll take 7 to 8 wins if Zach is good. King Co, I agree with you. And I'll get to Enlign Me's question too. But one thing I have noticed, did you guys notice the pictures from Jets workouts the other day? I'll tell you this, like one of the things I've been saying is Zach Wilson really needs to add some weight because he needs to be able to endure the punishment. He needs to get stronger. Has anyone seen the pictures of Zach? He put on some muscle this offseason. He looks try and remember which Jets Twitter had. It was one of the many Twitter accounts, but they had like a side by side of Wilson last year and Wilson this year. You can tell Wilson's probably put on about 10 pounds of muscle. Like he's working his butt off, and that's something you want to see. And that was one of my biggest criticisms of him was I think he's got the height, but I wanted to see him get a little bit thicker to help deal with some of the punishment. So he looks good. So if Becton doesn't play, does he trade for tackle? Look, the way the Jets draft fell, like Becton's going to play. I don't see Becton getting traded. Like this is really kind of a sink or swim year. And for the Jets, really this season is going to come down to the 2 most influential players on this Jet roster this year. Number 1, Zach Wilson, because he's the quarterback. But I would say number 2 is Mekhi Becton, because the Jets could lose a pass rusher. They have depth there. The Jets could lose one of these interior offensive linemen. They could survive. I still want to bring back LVT. There's a couple free agents out there that I think they can go and address the guard position. And look, I don't think Feeney's great, but I think he's at least serviceable. But it will definitely be interesting to see how they address it. But if Mekhi Becton does not play well and Mekhi Becton gets hurt, that would probably be the most impactful injury, because I love the draft pick of Mitchell, but Mitchell to me is they're grooming him to be an eventual starter. And if they have to play him like 2 or 3 games at right tackle, maybe I'm wrong, but he could be serviceable. But if you're asking him to play an entire season, that's why I believe when the question was brought up, like what position do you think they're going to look at? I do think Joe Douglas has a couple of names written down at some offensive tackles. Storm Norton was an interesting guy for the Chargers, because I thought they were going to go tackle, but they did go guard in the draft. So I'm interested to see what they do with their tackle position there. Trying to think of other veteran tackles that might be cut. I don't think anyone from the Giants, and either way, the Giants really someone you want to get a tackle from. Interesting name maybe for tackle. I'm not sure how Douglas evaluates him, but I'm trying to remember, because the Seahawks drafted Cross. Maybe you guys can jog my memory because I'm just drawing a blank. But who was the tackle that the Jets used to have that went and played right tackle for the Seahawks? Because the name's escaping me. Like once I see it, I'll know. Cowboys League draft board: Garrett Wilson 4, Sauce 5, Brees 19, JJ at 28. Everyone's board's different. I mean, the Jets had JJ. They had all those guys in their top 7 or 8. And then Brees, I think Joe Led slipped that he was, I think, 18th on the board. Potential top 10 line, Becton's healthy. Absolutely. Jared Jones getting too old for this, such an epic blunder. Brandon Shell, that's who it was. Thanks, BK, and thank you, Enlighten Me. I mean, could Shell be someone? He's got some experience like as the swing tackle. That could be a potential name for guys out there. I'm just going through my head of like who's available now. I mean, there's some tackles that like in their high 30s. I don't think the Jets would bring them in. Uh, uh, right at this point, I'm just trying to look up. I have a list of all the free agents. So I'm just seeing if I can find out what the remaining guys are on this big board. Yeah, I'll try to bring that up in a little bit. But I was just thinking, like, tackle to me is still a huge position. Tackle's a position where they need to get some depth. And but I will also say too, the Jets haven't mentioned it. I've mentioned it on this show a couple times. A part of me, yeah, I know he's not great, Kinko, but I'm saying it's like a swing tackle. I would be intrigued to see what the Jets do with Elijah Vera Tucker because I've been kind of saying this on the show. Is I think part of the move also to right guard is if he has to, they could play him at right tackle. He played tackle in college, and I would feel more comfortable with him. Like, I keep saying this, like, if I had to choose, I'd rather try to go with, like, Dan Feeney or a different backup guard and kick McGovern over to one of the tackle spots, probably the right tackle, because, like, if Fant goes down for a couple games and Becton's healthy, you can probably put Becton at the left side. Because Vera Tucker, like, the Jets haven't said that, but they could technically uh do that. But I'm interested to see what players get cut. Like Douglas has said that, but really going back to the Jets winning this draft, like I said, like you come out of this draft feeling like Joe Douglas is the guy. And like I've said this, I believe like even if Zach Wilson isn't the guy and struggles immensely this year. I don't see that happening, but if it does, like I still feel comfortable with Joe being in charge and Joe making the decision because I feel like you finally have someone that knows what to do and someone that knows how to build a roster. I mean, the Jets have never had this. Like, even going back to the Tannenbaum days, a lot of Tannenbaum success came on those early drafts where Eric Mangini was in charge of a lot of the personnel. So I really give Joe Douglas a lot of credit for what he's been doing. But the other situation too is like, let's say the Jets, like Zach Wilson doesn't work out. The Jets all of a sudden next year have a good young roster and a good young amount of weapons where if they feel they can draft the quarterback, great. But maybe there's a veteran quarterback or a great quarterback that all of a sudden wants to move and sees the Jets as an intriguing place, good young roster, good offensive line, good running game to take some pressure off him. I mean, it could be an intriguing match. So that's another reason why I love what Joe Douglas has done because he's put it in a position where even if Wilson, worst case scenario, even Wilson doesn't work, I feel this team is young. They got a lot of talent, and they would be more enticing to either bring in a quarterback or if they have to get another young quarterback, it would be a really good transition from day one. But that's if Zach doesn't work. I still believe in Zach Wilson. I really love his talent. I love his work ethic, but we'll have to see this year. They've been good at drafting. So the Cowboys being high on Garrett and Sauce is really good news. Uh, let's see. If LDT can't find a starting job like he wants, maybe he'll come back. Then we could cut GVR. I still don't know why Greg Van Roten's on this roster. That's one of the things. Like, if I had to critique Douglas on one thing, I'm like, how is GVR still on the freaking roster? Like, how is he taking up cap space? AVT is reported to be right guard. There's no center option besides McGovern. Well, they brought back Feeney, who played a couple games at center. So I think he's going to be pretty much the backup center. It's also going to be interesting, too, because Mitchell, the kid they drafted, I do look at him as maybe someone that they're viewing as a swing for four positions. Because don't forget, he played all tackle positions and guard positions. He started 37 games in college, but he's probably better suited to be a right tackle guard. But maybe it's a situation too where we're talking about one of the guards going down, which I hope doesn't happen. But if it does, or a situation where instead of putting him out on an island at the tackle position, you move AVT to a tackle position because AVT's had experience, AVT's played in the NFL, and then you could kick Mitchell inside to a right guard position because Mitchell has played guard. He's played it in college. It would be a little bit easier transition, and then he's not alone trying to guard some of these speed rushers coming off the edge. If Zach fails, I'd rather draft another QB class. Next year's at least 4 to 5 deep, maybe more. Snoopy, it's early. There's two great ones in the next year's class. and I laugh because I've talked about a little bit the Giants draft with some of my Giants friends, and I said they should have taken Malik Willis in the third round. They look at me like I'm crazy. And I'm like, you do realize that next year everyone's jockeying for a quarterback. Like already teams like the Eagles are jockeying for a position. There's already like 4 or 5 teams that are kind of circling the calendar for quarterbacks next year. There's just one problem. There's probably 2 or 3 great ones in at the most in the draft. That's probably gonna be 4 or 5 drafted next year because there's so few this year. But I mean, you look, the Panthers probably could be in play. The Saints could be in play. The Buccaneers, for all we know, could be in play. It'd be hard for them because they're probably going to be one of the top higher picks, like around the 30s. But Seattle could be in play. The Giants could be in play. I mean, there's so many teams that could be in play for a quarterback next year. It's going to be kind of hard. Like if you're not within the top 5, you're really not in striking distance to get a quarterback. I definitely want to upgrade from Connor. Uh, well, it's tough. I know that's one of the things is people keep going like, well, we gotta get the center position. Like McGovern isn't bad. McGovern's a good starter, but the other thing too is with a team, you're never gonna fill out every single position on a roster, and you're never gonna fully get. I mean, the Jets are still coming a long way. Like they've added a lot of great pieces this year, but they still. I mean, how much more could they have added? I mean, they've done a great job with the defensive line, the edge rushers. They've added a lot of playmakers in this draft, but you just look at where they are right now. I just don't see them like maybe a center falls loose, but I'm curious to see what the cap situation is going to be and what teams cut players. What team is close to the cap that could be a cap casualty? That is a great question, Kev. Let me check that really quick. I know the Jets were one of the better cap situations teams. Let's see. According to over the cap, the 49ers have 700,000 in space. Patriots are near the top of the cap. Cardinals, Titans, Giants, Raiders, Rams, and Ravens and Bills are all within 7 million of the cap. So maybe they cut someone to create some space. Um, the 49ers are obviously intriguing because of the connections that the Jets have with that organization. So if they could, maybe one of their guys comes loose, maybe they cut a defensive tackle who the Jets are high on, maybe they cut an offensive lineman. So I mean, they're a team to keep an eye on as well. But let's see. Um but overall, I mean, I think the Jets killed it in the draft. I think they did an unbelievable job. I mean, they were getting unanimous praise, cap casualty for an OT like Moses. Uh so many teams looking for a quarterback next year, right? Texans are one, Giants are one, Miami could be one, Eagles could be one. Miami's a little bit different though. I just have a feeling Miami's not going to want to go with the rookie. They're going to try to make a splash and get a veteran. How do you feel about the Tannehill commentaries? I think all he did was show his insecurities. It sounds like he feels threatened already. Well, I actually agree with Tannehill. Look, I don't think Tannehill is an elite quarterback, but think about what happened to him in the span of a week. And one of my things was I was saying in the draft show, when I was doing the recap, is like, man, I'd love to be in a fly on the wall in some of these quarterback rooms. I'd love to be a fly on the wall with the Packers picks, with Rodgers and Tannehill. So the Titans, I understand that they lost last year in the first round, but Ryan Tannehill had them as the number 1 seed and the only bye in the AFC. I mean, we tend to forget that, but pretty good. And that was without Derrick Henry for a long period of time. And even in that playoff game, he really wasn't 100%. So Ryan Tannehill was probably thinking to himself, like, if we have Derrick Henry healthy at the back end of the season with our defensive line, and look, their division isn't great. I mean, I love what the Colts have done, but they're still limited with Matt Ryan. The Texans are a disaster, and I don't think the Jaguars are any good. I mean, could I make the case that Titans could run the table and go 6-0 in their division? And with the rest of the AFC conferences, like outside of the Bills, like I think a lot of the teams are going to beat up on each other. So the Titans have a good chance to be the number 1 seed. So you're seeing there as Ryan Tannehill saying, okay, we are a great team. We are the defending number 1 seed. We're just a few moves away. and then you trade the best receiver on your team in a deal that many people around the league are going, wait, what? Like AJ Brown, I know it came out this week that they wanted to keep him for 16 or 17. He wanted over 20. He got his wish. He goes out of town. But even at the time, a lot of people, the reaction in the NFL, and I agree with it, was like, that's all you got for AJ Brown. Like, you're looking at what all these other receivers are going for. It's like you couldn't make more calls or get anything more than a first and a third. And then they use that first to go and get Traylon Burks. It's like, okay, so we had a great number one. We're taking a talented receiver in the draft, but we're not sure what he's going to be. Then we have the 26th pick. We could have taken Jermaine Johnson, a pass rusher, or another piece. We trade out of 26 with the Jets. And then on top of all of this, you draft Malik Willis, who basically you're grooming to be his replacement. I get it. Like, quarterbacks get salty. I mean, never forget Tom Brady got pissed when they took Jimmy Garoppolo. Aaron Rodgers got pissed when they took Jordan Love. I mean, it's just they just view it as someone on their territory and someone trying to take their job. So, like, is it a little bit insecurity? Sure, but you look at Ryan Tannehill, like in a span of a weekend, and like you saw the frustration on Mike Vrabel's face during the draft. In the span of the weekend, the Titans went from a team that you looked like, okay, they're a few pieces away from really repeating, not because they're one of the best teams in the AFC, but because their conference isn't great. They have a good enough quarterback, they have a good enough defense, they have a good enough running game to realistically be the number one or two seed in the AFC. To now all of a sudden having a rookie receiver who's probably going to have to be their number one option. They didn't add more pieces. And instead of getting more players and more pieces to help out this current roster, they go and get Malik Willis. Now, in the long run, it's probably a good move for the Titans. If Willis pans out or Willis is about even what Ryan Tannehill is, he saves them a lot of money in the short term. But for Ryan Tannehill to be upset, I totally understand why Ryan Tannehill's upset. Why do you think Tennessee didn't let him know they were trading AJ and taking a QB? I find it crazy they didn't inform him. It's a weird dynamic with teams. I think it's better to be forthcoming because it pisses the players off, especially like you've paid Ryan Tannehill. This isn't something where Ryan Tannehill's still quarterback on his rookie deal or the team hasn't made a significant investment. No, the team has invested a significant amount of money and they're telling you that you're the franchise guy. And basically, Tannehill did exactly. And I understand he lost in the playoffs, and that probably is one of the big reasons they drafted a quarterback. But if you were to tell me at the beginning of last year that the number one seed in the AFC would be the Titans, or the number one seed would be the Titans the week after the Jets beat them, you would have thought I was crazy. But Tannehill still led that team to the number one seed in the AFC. And he's looking around going, okay, I did what you wanted. I basically lived up to my end of the bargain. And now you are getting rid of my best weapon. You're not talking to me. Like, do you really believe I'm the face of the franchise? And now you draft a possible replacement. I get where he's coming from. It's like you show me confidence. I see all these other quarterbacks getting all these toys, all these weapons. I see teams building these super teams in the AFC, and we're not trying to keep up with them. We're in fact losing some key pieces. Lots of teams regret taking a QB for a year this year. How far down QB went felt strangely like collusion. I don't think that's collusion. I look, this was not a good quarterback class. On my board, I only had one quarterback in the top 50 prospects. That was Malik Willis. I didn't love this quarterback class. I thought it was not a good one. But I would say if you were a team that might be in the market for a quarterback next year, this is why I said I thought the Giants should have taken Malik Willis in the third round, is get me a quarterback this year, see what they have, and you can tell pretty quickly if they have it or not. If it doesn't work, is it hurt to waste a third round pick on a quarterback? Sure. But if you hit on the quarterback, it's worth a lot more. So, and that's the other thing. I don't know how many quarterbacks are going to be available next year. I mean, the Panthers did with Matt Corral. I don't think they really love Corral. I don't think that they truly believe in Matt Corral, but at least they've put themselves in a situation where if Corral hits, they're set up great. If it doesn't work out and they go through training camp, they're like, okay, he's not the guy, then they know they need a quarterback next year. Burks walked into a pressure cooker. Go replace the top 5 receivers or the fans will kill you and the manager. Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think it was just a terrible, terrible situation. Hey, Nolan, when are you going to put out your draft content on the Giants? Always looking forward to your content, brother. I can do that tomorrow. I can definitely do that recap of the Giants draft tomorrow. The Giants draft, I'm a bit more critical of than a lot of people. It's one of those weird drafts where if they hit right, it's a very good draft. But where they drafted certain players, I thought was a reach. In the second round, I thought was a reach. And I'm adamant like they should have drafted Malik Willis just because you're also going into a year where you know Daniel Jones isn't going to be probably the long term answer. You're not picking up his fifth year option. I know you have Tyrod Taylor as a backup, but the Giants defense is good enough that they're probably going to manage to squeak into 5 or 6 wins. I don't see them. They'll probably be a top 10 pick next year, but they're probably not going to be a top 5. So if I was them, I would have taken Malik Willis. It's like that old adage, a bird in the hand's worth two in the bush. Like I get wanting a quarterback next year, and I get looking at next year's class being better. But when you have a chance to draft the talent like Malik Willis, who really to me had the only traits that really stuck out as potentially being elite in this class. Like I'm shocked that he didn't go to the Steelers. I mean, that to me was a great smokescreen by the Steelers, but um I mean, I know everyone loves Kenny Pickett, but I'm still looking at going, okay, eh, Kenny Pickett, I think at best is maybe Kirk Cousins. And so you put let's say he's Kirk Cousins. You put Kirk Cousins in a division with Sean Watson, with Lamar Jackson, and with Joe Burrow. Yeah, I'd say they had the fourth best quarterback in that division, and it's by a pretty wide margin. I mean, it's basically like driving up in a Ford with a bunch of Ferraris. It's just incredible. If Titans lose with Tannehill, they can do so much without him. Makes sense to cut his big salary and try Wills. Like they're gonna try it this year. But the Titans also are in a window. I mean, they have Derrick Henry. How many great years of Derrick Henry do you have left? Maybe one or two. I mean, their window was now. I mean, they didn't have a long runway for this. And if they kept AJ Brown, still drafted Malik Willis, fine. Like I get where they're going from, but they're a team right now that is, I think, trying to do two things at the same time. Is they're trying to get younger and rebuild a bit, but also compete. Like you have to be either all in. Like you can't be half in, half out. It never works in the NFL. Like you have to be committed. You have to be aggressive. And look, was trading AJ Brown aggressive? Yeah. Was getting a younger receiver aggressive? Sure. But at the end of the day, I just look and I go, like, are they? I get they're looking more at the long term picture, but you have arguably the best running back in football right now, Derrick Henry, who got nicked last year. I mean, how many great years of a Derrick Henry do you have left? Like, realistically, maybe 2 or 3. Like, if you're going to be doing this, then trade Derrick Henry, get as many picks as you can, and go full rebuild. If not, like, if you are committed to winning, go all in. Keep AJ Brown. I mean, he's still under contract. He's still wouldn't be happy, but you'd still be able to at least get him to training camp. And then with the fines and losing salary, I do think he would at least play through this year. Um, if Wilson fails, they should go with a veteran. If there's a good veteran option, sure. Uh, we haven't been good at drafting QBs in the last decade or more. Like, I get it, but it's one of those things too where a lot of it's luck and a lot of it's just making sure you find the right guy. I think that at the time, I still think Wilson was the right choice, and people are saying, "Oh, he wasn't the right choice." Well, look at the other quarterbacks. Like Justin Fields, probably more physically gifted, but he's been struggling. The only one that's succeeding is Mac Jones, and even Mac Jones, like people like love talking about Mac Jones. Oh, Mac Jones is Mac Jones is. I'm like, we do realize that the Patriots, like the last 5 weeks of the season, did not look like the same team. The Patriots, that was also mostly the same roster that not only spent $300 million to get better, but that was the same roster that Cam Newton, who was shot, basically took to like a, what was it, 8-8 or 9-7 record the year before. I mean, they have a great defense. With Belichick and that defense, they can win 10 games every year. It's when they get to the playoffs and play really great quarterbacks That's the problem. And we've seen it time and time again. And we saw it with Mac Jones. I mean, there were games like, don't forget this. They won a game last year where Mac Jones threw 3 passes. That happened. So for everyone saying like, "Oh, Mac Jones, Mac Jones, Mac Jones," I'm like, okay, yeah, he's an NFL quarterback. I always said he was an NFL quarterback, but he's a limited quarterback. He's the Patriots were the perfect situation because he goes to a team where, with their coach and with their defense, they're going to walk into 9 or 10 games a year. But you look when they get to the big show, when they get to the big stage, when you have to take on the Mahomes, uh the Josh Allens. Like you need someone that you feel you can punch with. Now Zach Wilson has more upside, and I do think if he hits his potential, he could potentially be in that weight class. But on his best day, and even Mac Jones reaches his peak, I don't think he'll ever be one of those guys that's in that weight class. Um, I think we need one more receiver. Don't trust Mims or Davis. I don't think anyone trusts Mims. Um, no, Max is physically limited. I wouldn't be surprised if Zappy is the star day one. Oh, Mac, that's what it was. I was like, Zappy. I'm like, who the frick is Zappy? I'm like, Zappy. Like, Jesus. But no, I do feel like the like you look too, like the Patriots take advantage of teams with bad quarterbacks, young quarterbacks, and teams in the regular season. Like once you get to the postseason, it really becomes um about having the better quarterback and having the more playmakers. And I do think the Jets did an unbelievable job. And for even all that money the Patriots spent last year, I mean, the Patriots, like guys, they were talking about first take, like the Jets potentially taking the Patriots in the AFC. I still think that the Patriots are going to win 9 games just because of Bill and that defense. But I would even say too, like I feel like Mac Jones is going to be in a tougher year two situation than Zach Wilson. I think the expectations on him are going to be a lot higher on Mac Jones because he made a Pro Bowl. I don't know how he made a Pro Bowl last year, and they made the postseason. But the other thing too is like, look, the Patriots spent $300 million last year, but really outside of Matt Judon, were any of their free agents like really game changers and ones you go, wow? And even this year's draft, like I love Cole Strange. I I won't judge them too much for taking him in the first round. They really love him and think he's going to be a day one starter. All the power to you. Personally, I thought he was a second round pick, but if you overpick a lineman, I'm never going to, if you believe he's the right fit, I'm never going to critique you. But then you look at their next pick, it was a wide receiver. I mean, the Patriots have been, especially with Bill, it seemed like Bill was back in charge of the draft this year. The Patriots have always been a team like there's certain positions they draft really well. Corner has been a position they always draft well. Lineman's always a position they always seem to find some good offensive linemen some there. And that's why I was a little bit more leaning on Cole Strange than a lot of people because they always seem to develop. Now I know their offensive line coach isn't there anymore, but they've always been a team that drafts well and develops well on the offensive line. The one position the Patriots have never drafted is wide receiver. Like every guy they draft has been a massive disappointment. And I just look at too, Mac Jones, people forget his offensive coordinator, the guy that was there for years, is now the head coach of the Raiders. So Zach Wilson's the only guy going into next year that's kept his offensive coach, his offensive coordinator, has kept his head coach, and that's kept basically the same general manager. And oh, by the way, has more pieces around him than he did the previous year. So with Mac Jones, like I just look at it and go for next year, okay, where did the Patriots get better? They didn't get better at wide receiver. They didn't get better at tight end. They can run the football and they drafted another running back. So they'll run the football well. They'll control the clock, but they also lost their best corner. Now the Patriots will survive because they always seem to find some corner from like Canada or some guy off of a practice squad, who then they'll turn into a Pro Bowl corner. But you can't tell me that now back to back years they lose Stephon Gilmore and Jackson, who are two of the best corners in the NFL, and that doesn't impact their secondary. Like I just don't think the Patriots had a great draft. Now I'll never be super harsh on them because they've got the clout. But this draft to me, like last year's draft was a really good draft. This year's draft with the Patriots, I was just scratching my head on some of these picks, and I'm thinking to myself, Okay, Cole Strange makes sense because you're trying to help with that offensive line, which helped Mac Jones. Like, I look at the receiver they took, and I'm like, he's a developmental guy, and the one position you guys can't seem to develop is wide receiver. It was just like, okay, like I get that you're appearing to try to help Mac Jones, but it doesn't seem like you actually are. Um, just happy to QB that the Pats drafted fourth because he's a lot like Brady. He broke Joe Burrow's records. I also think the Jets should have. In line me, they weren't going to cut Mosley. It was going to be a $15 million dead cap hit. Like they're keeping the contract. Like they're letting CJ Mosley play out the contract. They can cut him at the end of next year, where basically they save $15 million and only have $3 million of dead cap money. And look, they have the space right now that they can afford that contract. Next year, though, it's basically they'll go into next offseason with an extra 15 million on top. So they'll definitely cut him. They like CJ Mosley. They obviously don't like him for that contract, but I also think that's part of the reason they didn't renegotiate, because if they renegotiate, I think what was going to happen is they'd have to lock in CJ for an additional year. It'd be less this year for the cap and better for the cap hit, but you'd be more committed to him long term. So I think the Jets just said, look, we'll eat the cap this year. And it gives us the flexibility. Like if we really want CJ back and he really wants to come back, we can negotiate a contract. If we feel it's time to move on and we want to get out a year early than a year late, they can also do that as well. Davis Mills would have been QB1 if he came out this year. Would a steal by the Texans? I mean, I guess. I mean, last year's quarterback class where they drafted him was better. The Texans, like Davis Mills was fine last year. I mean, again, the Texans were just irrelevant, but now I want to see him year two because they also fired a head coach. Like we were thinking the Texans were going to win. I kept saying I didn't think the Texans were going to win a game, maybe one or two at the most. They won 4 games. I don't know how. And I would have basically like I would have basically said, okay, they over exceed expectations. But like the Jaguars, like I don't get it, man. Like the Texans draft, like Stingley's a talented player. I think that was a reach. Um, Personally, like I've been saying this, like if I was Jacksonville or I was Houston, I know it's not the sexy picks. I know that's not the picks that the team that the fans would want, but I would have picked an offensive lineman. Look, you have a young quarterback, protect him. Like with the first pick in the draft, like they're taking a swing on Trayvon Walker. They went all defensively. I know they extended Robinson. I don't think Robinson's that great. Just get Icky for Jacksonville. Don't overthink it. Get Icky. If Icky's off the board for the Texans, get Evan Neal. Just get a guy that can play multiple positions. Protect your young quarterback. Like you keep telling me, like you believe in this kid and that you believe he's your future quarterback. Well, prove it. Go out there and get someone to protect him. Because Derek Stingley, again, really talented player, and I just don't love him with the injury history. But I get getting playmakers on the defensive side of the ball, but when you have a young quarterback, eliminate as many variables as you can. I mean, the Jets had the luxury with all the picks that they had that they were able to get Garrett Wilson. They were able to get weapons, and they started last year with getting weapons in the offensive line. What are the odds Wilson puts it together? Wouldn't be shocked if he ends up being a top 10 QB. His potential's off the charts, but the Jets do have the coaching staff to bring it out. I think he does have the talent to be a top 10 quarterback. My biggest question is, can he stay healthy and can he continue to develop? Like we saw it last year early where we saw the wow plays, but what we did also see was a lot of the turnovers. Then he cut down the wow plays and played more conservatively and played more of a game manager, and that worked. It's going to be combining protecting the football but also being someone that's not afraid to take shots down the field and putting the ball in the right spots down the field. Because Wilson has the arm to throw it all over the field. The question is, can he do it at the right times? Can he do it with the right coverages? Can he read the routes the right way? I mean, there's a lot, but I do think one of the biggest things for him is continuity. Basically, pretty much the same starting 1-2 with the receiving core. I mean, they're adding Garrett Wilson, but he knows the running back. This is his second year in the system. And one of the underrated things about keeping the staff for him and why I also think Joe Douglas deserves credit is the Jets made 0 coaching changes. And You might not agree with the staff. You might not love the staff. And look, you have your own opinion. I still think it's a little too early to judge the staff, but keeping that continuity, and that's another reason why I give Joe Douglas praise, is like he understands the importance of continuity. Where one of the reasons I think the Jets really screw up Sam Darnold, and look, I think now we've kind of seen the track record that Darnold's probably not a great QB, is he finished the season well, but then the Jets decided to gut the coaching staff, bring in a whole new coaching staff. And what that did was it threw him off because you then had a whole new system to learn from year one to year two, a whole new list of verbiage, a whole different type of system. And that's really complicated for a quarterback. For Zach this year, he didn't have to learn a new system. He could focus on the mechanics. He could focus on those short passes. They had trouble with the accuracy. He could work on his accuracy. He could work on his footwork. He could work on a lot more of the technical stuff because it's the same playbook. Now they can expand the playbook and the verbiage and make it a little bit more complicated, but he's now gotten a full year of the basics. He's now had a full year of the basic understanding, the understanding of the principles. So what that allows him to do now is it allows him to basically spend this year focusing on the mechanical issues. JJ will be elite, 12 sacks a year one. A little bit of a stretch dread for life, but I wouldn't hate it. I think he could be easily a 9 to 10 sack guy. A lot of it too is the Jets. I don't think you're going to see one player get a ton of sack numbers because they only play the defensive lineman like 65-70% of the snaps. They're going to rotate heavily. So even like, for example, Jermaine Johnson was their first round pick, but you might not even see him out there with a starting defense because they're going to basically rotate everyone. Like they're so deep at the defensive line position now that you're going to see guys getting a ton of snaps. You're going to see them spread the wealth and play a lot of different things. No lie, if anyone would have done a mock and gave us the players that we got in real life, people would say it's not realistic. No, I agree. It was one of those things where you're like, okay, is this real? Like, did they really get all these players? Like, because don't forget too, every team's board's different. Every analyst board is different. So I think it's more important where the team guys. So like the Jets and Salah have said, look, like we love Jermaine Johnson so much. Like if basically Garrett Wilson was not there at 10, like if he went the eighth pick, they would have taken Jermaine Johnson there, which makes you wonder what receiver the Jets then had next in line and what they would have had to do to get a receiver. But it fell perfectly for this team. And it worked out in a situation. And Joe Douglas, I give him a lot of credit. Like he was aggressive, got back in the first round to get Jermaine Johnson. He was aggressive to jump the Texans, who he knew was going to take Brees Hall. I mean, you saw a lot of fans like that was one thing that I love. Some of the experts like, oh, the Jets shouldn't have taken a running back. Like the analysts, I'm like, look, they got a young quarterback. What's better? Give him as many weapons as possible. And let's be honest, if we're really thinking about it, Brees Hall, talent wise, is easily a first round pick. The thing is, teams don't want to take running backs in the first round. In some ways, I don't understand why teams don't take him at the back end of the first round. If you really love a guy, it gives you the fifth year option, which again, running backs hate because they want to get paid early. But there was a great thing about some of the Bills fans that were absolutely livid that the Jets took Brees Hall. So, Patriots post bear a team that punches down on lesser teams, only to get curb stomped by teams that barely match them. But again, KD, I think you hit right on the head. In the regular season, I mean, in 17 games, Bill Belichick's probably the best coach on the field for bare minimum 15, more likely 16 games. And when you're in the regular season and you're playing lesser teams or you're playing teams with younger quarterbacks who are still trying to figure it out and you have their complicated defense, yeah, Bill's going to look really good in the regular season. But when you come to the postseason, it's a whole different ball game. So I do think that that is really important to keep in mind. But I mean, you look at basically the Patriots last year. I mean, what were the teams that they beat last year? They beat the Jets twice. They lost to the Dolphins twice. Who did they beat? The Jaguars 50-10. Jaguars are terrible. The Bills beat them twice. No, the Bills beat them once. I'm sorry, the way the schedule's reading is weird. The Bills stopped them in the playoffs. Bills lost that 14-10 game where it was 55-mile-an-hour winds, which was really, I mean, the elements played more in that game, but let's be honest. I mean, the last two games they played the Bills never punted. They lost to the Colts. They beat the Jaguars. Dolphins beat them. I mean, just think about the Patriots. Like after they beat the Bills, they won against the Colts, lost to the Bills, beat the Jags, Dolphins. Like they finished the season, including playoffs, like 2-3. It's not like a great season for them. Like you look, like they beat the Jets twice, Dolphins beat them twice, Saints beat them. Like you look at teams that had good quarterbacks or good coaches, they lost to the Bucks. This is the teams they beat last year: the Jets twice, Texans, uh, Chargers, which don't forget young core. Even though Herbert's amazing, he's still a quarterback. They beat the Panthers, the Falcons, the Browns, the Titans, and then the Bills and the Jag. I mean, really, like the quarterbacks they lost to, like Herbert, take Herbert out. Like they lost to better teams with quarterbacks. Josh Allen, they lost to. They lost to Dak Prescott. They lost to Tom Brady. They lost to God, even the Saints. Like who was the quarterback for the Saints last year at that time? I think it was James. Was James? I think James was still in there for late September. Or no, who was it? Yeah, I don't think they had made the change yet. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think it was Jameis. But no, I just look at like the Patriots. They just didn't have those elite quarterbacks. Yeah, and like Snoopy, I think it's a fair thing to say because don't forget too, like people were loving the Patriots last year, but I never thought they were really a great team. Like I just thought that, and especially too, like don't forget that was a team that spent $300 million in free agency. So it was a thing where I'm like, okay, if the Patriots are really going to dominate this year, it's because they spent well. And I've said outside of Matt Judon, who was a great signing for them and someone I really wanted the Jets to get, outside Judon, like who's been a really great addition to that team? Like, I don't think there's been one guy you're like, oh my God, that guy's been amazing. That guy's been an absolute steal for them. But I still think when it comes to dynasty, like I do have to give the Patriots credit because they did for a long time have a great scouting department, draft incredibly well, but I don't think they draft well anymore, and that's one of the reasons they have spent all that money. And this whole purpose of this episode was talking about Joe Douglas. And I think that the Jets are well run and they're in a great situation. They've done a great job of accumulating talent and really talent at key positions. Like the current NFL, like you need 5 positions, and the Jets have addressed those in spades in the last 2 drafts. And look, of all the young quarterbacks, I think Zach Wilson's in the best chance to see, not just because he has the same coach, not because he's the same OC, but because he has a front office that's dedicated to making him better and surrounding him with pieces. No team did more this offseason to surround a young quarterback or even attempted to. I mean, they were in the market for Tyreek Hill. They had a trade in place to get Tyreek Hill. They've been trying to do everything possible. I mean, they've gotten him a new running back to go with. They've gotten him another receiver. They've upgraded the tight end room where he actually now has tight ends, not just one he can throw to, but 3 potentially he can throw to. They've upgraded the offensive line, adding a Pro Bowl guard. They've upgraded the defense with the pass rush. Like, you look at the Jets, the way they've been built now, especially with their run game. If the Jets can get out in front early, like if Zach Wilson can make a play or 2 early in the game and the Jets can get ahead, they're going to be a tough team to deal with because they have a great pass rush. They have a pass rush they can get after and a pass rush that now is a better secondary on the back end. But they also have a team. Jets can play keep away and run the football. You have Brees Hall. You have Michael Carter. You have a team that you could go out there and do a 10-minute drive if you really want to and just milk clock if you're able to get a lead because you have now a stable of running backs. You have an offensive line, especially the offensive line. I do worry about Becton and pass protection, but there's no question like Becton's an unbelievable run blocker. You have Elijah Vera Tucker, who's a road grader. You have Lakin Tomlinson, who's a road grader. I mean, you have 3 or 4 dudes on the offensive line that can just move people. And look, if they can run the football and establish run, I think they'll be really great this year. I really do. But again, guys, that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow to talk about the New York Giants and their draft. So much more content coming. If you're new to the channel, make sure you bash that subscribe button for all the latest content. Thank you as always for joining us. Really appreciate it. And I'll see you later here on Rich Sports Talk.